Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the Juvenile Instructor from the 1st of October 1901, and this article is entitled Lives of Our Leaders, the Presiding Bishopric, Bishop Robert T. Burton. I've heard his name so many times, I can't say that I know anything in particular about his life, but I do know that he was in the Presiding Bishopric for years. He was never presiding bishop, as far as I'm aware. He was the first and second counselors, depending on who the presiding bishop was. So he was second counselor in the Presiding Bishopric under Edward Hunter, and then he was first counselor in Presiding Bishopric under William B. Preston. And he continued to do that until 1907. Like I said, heard the name a lot. I don't really know anything about his life, so let's find out more about him, shall we? Robert Taylor Burton, first counselor to William B. Preston, presiding bishop of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who has figured so prominently in the civil, ecclesiastical, and military affairs of Utah, was born October 25th, 1821. Wow. At Ambersburg, Canada West. Okay, so that makes him quite old, like much older than most of the other people we've been looking at. Most of them were born in like the 50s, 1850s, and he was born in the 1820s. Like, he's much older than them. So this was written in 1901. He was already 80. Yeah, that's kind of a long time to live for that time period. Yeah. Okay, so he was Canadian. He was the son of Samuel and Hannah Shipley Burton. His parents emigrated to America in 1817, sailing from the town of Hull, Yorkshire, England, and locating at Pulteneyville, Wayne County, New York, where they resided for 2 or 3 years. That's surprising to me. So they lived in America very shortly, but they must have moved back to Canada before he was born, since he was born in Canada, yeah? Interesting. So his parents were English immigrants, yeah, from Britain. From New York, they moved to Canada and remained until 1828, when they returned to the United States and settled in Lucas County, Ohio. Okay, and he was born while they were in Canada. From here, they moved to Adrian, Michigan, and later returned from their home in Canada. Here in the autumn of 1837, the Burton family were visited by 2 Mormon missionaries, who had been refused entertainment by members of the religious denominations. Robert T. Burton, then about 16 years of age, in the interests of fairness, love and justice and hospitality, persuaded his father to entertain the strangers and provide a place in which they could expound their views. This little incident led to the family embracing the gospel. Wow. So he persuaded his family basically to listen. Shortly after this event, Robert T. Burton visited relatives in Ohio and attended school during the winter of 1837 and 1838. Yeah, 16 and 17, yeah. And in September, at the request of his parents, he returned to their home in Canada and was baptized into the church October 23rd, 1838, by Elder Henry Cook at age 17. Oh, just before his 17th birthday. So, a few days later, the family left Canada to join the Saints in their gathering place in far west Missouri. In November of this year, the Saints, being expelled from the state, established their headquarters at Nauvoo, Illinois, and to this place the Burton family subsequently moved. There they remained until the spring of 1846. Okay. In June 1843, at the age of 22, Elder Burton left Nauvoo in company with Elder N.V. Jones to labor as a missionary in the state of Illinois, Michigan, and Ohio. After a year of successful work, he returned to Nauvoo a few days before the martyrdom of the prophet Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram, and enlisted in Captain Gleason's cavalry company of the Nauvoo Legion. He was on guard in the city at the time of the assassination of the prophet. For some time after, he struggled constantly to protect the lives and property of the saints from mob violence and robbery. About this time, he became a member of the Nauvoo Brass Band and Nauvoo Choir. Oh, musical. Interesting. In January 1845, Elder Burton was called on a special mission with Elder Samuel W. Richards to some of the central counties of the state of Illinois for the purpose of allaying the prejudice that had arisen in the minds of the people in consequence of the falsehoods circulated by apostates in the vicinity of Nauvoo. In December of the same year, Elder Burton was married to Maria S. Haven, the ceremony being performed by President Brigham Young. So that was 1845, right? So he was 24. In the following spring, 1846, the Saints were driven from Illinois, and he left with the first company who crossed the Mississippi and encamped on the west bank. The snow was about 18 inches deep and the weather intensely cold. So cold, in fact, that the people crossed and recrossed on the ice for provisions preparatory to their journey towards the Rocky Mountains. Yeah, I heard about that. It was especially cold in that winter, and it completely froze over the river, which is not something that happens very often, even then. And today it doesn't happen at all, as far as I'm aware. But yeah, that was the thing. The company arrived at Council Bluffs in June, and the main camp settled there, but Elder Burton, with his aged parents, moved down the Missouri River some 40 or 50 miles, where they made a temporary home. Okay, that's fair. Under the trying circumstances then existing, many of the saints succumbed to hardships and exposure, and were buried by the wayside. Among this number was Elder Burton's mother, who fell a prey to disease and was buried in a lonely grave near their temporary home on the Missouri River. That's really sad, especially since it sounded like she was really invested in going with them. In May 1848, the Burton family were organized in the company of President Brigham Young, and after a toilsome journey across the plains, they arrived in Salt Lake Valley September 23rd of the same year, and they spent the winter at the old fort, subsequently moving to the corner of 2nd West and 1st South Streets, Salt Lake City. I'm not familiar enough with the layout of the city to know exactly where that is, where they still reside well at the time of writing, yeah? Okay, so they moved way downtown. That's interesting. I mean, it sounds downtown. 2nd West and 1st South? Like, isn't that just, like, 3 blocks away from the temple? You know? 2 blocks west and 1 south. Yes. I mean, I could correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's the layout of the city. In the fall of 1849, the organization of a territorial militia was commenced, and early in the following year this company was called into active service by the governor to defend the settlers of Utah County against the hostile Indians. This was Elder Burton's first active service, and the cavalry to which he belonged played a very important part in an engagement with the Lamanites, which lasted 3 days. No, that doesn't sound fun. In September 1850, this same company was ordered north against the Shoshone Indians, and again in November went to Utah County against a remnant of the tribe whom they had fought the previous spring. Gosh, that doesn't sound fun at all. While on this campaign, he was elected lieutenant. In the following June, he accompanied another expedition against the Indians on the western desert, and although the men suffered much from thirst, they were successful in the battle fought in the desert west of Skull Valley. That's shocking to me. Like, the white settlers at the time were outsiders. Like, they didn't know the area well enough to really, to have an advantage in that area. The Native Americans who were fighting to protect themselves, and their right to live in that area, knew it really well, inside and out, and the fact that they managed to beat them, it must have simply been the superior firepower. And that just, oh gosh, that's not a happy story. In the spring of 1852, he took a small company east to Green River to protect the settlers from Indians and renegade white men. The following year, he was elected captain of Company A, then followed his commission as major, colonel, and major general. Wow, so he's a bit of a military guy, yeah? I mean, that was a militia, but still, same difference back then in that area. Yeah, they didn't have a true military, so, militia it is. In October 1856, he took a company of brethren east to rescue a handcart company who were in great distress some 500 or 600 miles east of Salt Lake. The immigrants were stranded on the Platte River. Hang on. Was that the William Martin Handcart Company? Let me make sure I got the year right really quick, but I think it was. 1856. Indeed. Okay. So this was the William Martin Handcart Companies. I didn't know he was part of that rescue mission. Wow. The weather was extremely cold. Yeah, we've heard about that. Yeah, the snow deep, in consequence of which they ran short of provisions and suffered untold hardships, being reduced to 1/4 rations until relief came from Salt Lake. Yeah, I heard that too. This, says Bishop Burton, was the hardest trip of my life. So many of the Latter-day Saints dying on the journey from hunger and cold. Yeah, imagine how traumatic that was. In August of 1858, Colonel Burton was again ordered to take a company to assist the immigrants and to take observation of the movements of the approaching United States Army, which was said to be coming for the purpose of exterminating the Mormons. He spent the remainder of the year in this campaign. Okay, so I guess that is kind of a military thing to do, yeah? Because that was the Utah War. I will, explain really briefly because I've mentioned it in other ones. So basically what happened is the United States government had the feeling that, they got wind, apparently from somebody, that the Mormons were staging an insurrection, and they came to tamp it out, basically. And they basically took over Utah territory for about 18 months, and that was in 1858 and 1859. So, but apparently Robert T. Burton was in the group who was scouting out where they were exactly. In 1862, he was sent by Governor Fuller to protect the U.S. mail between Fort Bridger and the Platte River, where stations had been burned, mail sacks cut open, and stock driven off by Indians and lawless whites. This duty he performed to the entire satisfaction of the governor and other authorities. In all the military history of Utah, General Burton was one of the principal men in perfecting the organization and operations of the militia in the territory of Utah. Since the disbanding of the Nauvoo Legion, he has been more prominent in our history as counselor to the presiding bishop of the church. Yeah, he was. That's how I knew him anyway. I didn't know he was so active in the military, in this case militia. In 1852, General Burton, we're going back in time now, was elected Constable of Salt Lake City and appointed U.S. Deputy Marshal in 1853, Sheriff, Collector, and Assessor of Salt Lake County in 1854, and Deputy Territorial Marshal in 1861. Interesting. Was appointed by President Abraham Lincoln Collector of Internal Revenue in 1862, occupying said office until 1869. Well, that'll make him very unpopular. Oh yeah, he's the guy who collects our taxes. Gosh. Besides these duties, he was elected a member of the Salt Lake City Council in 1856, in which capacity he served until 1873. City Council, yeah. He was a member of the Board of Regents of the University of Deseret from 1878 to 1884, and a member of the Legislative Council of Utah from 1875 to 1878. General Burton was one of a committee of 3 members appointed by the legislature of 1876, with Honorable A.O. Smoot and S.S. Smith, to arrange, compile, and publish all the laws of the territory of Utah then in force. He was also among the first to engage in home manufacture, being associated with Bishops A.O. Smoot and John Sharp in the erection of the Wasatch Woolen Mills near the southeast corner of Salt Lake City. Bishop Burton has also performed several missions on behalf of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In addition to those previously mentioned, he has performed missions in the eastern states and England. During the latter mission, he visited most of the important cities of Europe, and upon his return to England was chosen president of the London Conference. In 1859, Elder Burton was appointed counselor to Bishop Cunningham of the 15th Ward, Salt Lake City, and in 1867 was appointed bishop of that ward, which position he held until 1877, when he was released to fill the position as counselor to presiding bishop Edward Hunter. After the death of Bishop Hunter, he was appointed first counselor to presiding bishop William B. Preston, which office he still fills. I feel like we lost some time in there because they barely mentioned the 1870s, and also that it was very disjointed and not at all in chronological order. So let's do some fact checking. I don't even know how much of this was true because sometimes they really don't get it right. So let's take a look. Alright, it's not too long. Let's just take a look and read the whole thing. Robert Taylor Burton, 25 October 1821 to 11 November 1907, was a member of the Presiding Bishopric of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS Church, from 1874 until his death. He was also one of the principal officers of the Nauvoo Legion during its Utah reconstitution, including during the Utah War, and led the territorial militia against the Morrisites during the 1862 Morrisite? I believe that's misspelled. I think it should say Morrisite War. Yeah? Morsto War. Yeah, it's Morrisite. Look at that. Okay, it has typos. It happens. Yeah? Okay, so biography. Born in Amherstburg, Upper Canada, Bishop Burton was called by Presiding Bishop Edward Hunter to be his second counselor in 1874. Burton served in this capacity until Hunter's death in 1883. When William B. Preston was called to be the new presiding bishop in 1884, Burton was asked to serve as his first counselor. Burton served in this capacity until his death. Well, that's not exactly going in chronological order now, is it? Burton joined the LDS Church in Upper Canada in 1838. Okay, yeah, they did mention that. In 1856, Burton was part of the rescue party sent from Salt Lake to assist the stranded Martin Handcart Company near the Sweetwater River. In 1870, Burton was tried and acquitted for the murder of Isabella Bowman, a person who had been killed by the Utah militia while surrendering in the Morrisite War. Whoa! Tried and acquitted. He was a military guy. That's such a difficult question, because can you hold someone accountable for, killing someone during a war? Because I understood that you can't. That is not something you can do. So if it's in the middle of a war and someone gets killed, it's either, you could be tried for, negligence, if you did it on accident, or if this person wasn't a threat and you accidentally killed them, something like that. Maybe that's what it was, but that's really rough to have to deal with. He must have killed her, because otherwise they wouldn't have brought him to court at all. The question was his actions in line with what would be reasonable during wartime or not? Yeah? And I can't answer that question because I wasn't there, and I didn't even know it happened until just now, and I've read one sentence about it. But, yeah, that's the question. Is it justified? Is it not? So, in this case, he was acquitted, which means that he was not found to be neglectful or anything worse. Yeah? Wow. Burton practiced plural marriage and fathered 27 children. That's a lot. He married... Hang on, how many wives did he have? 3. 3 wives, 27 children. That's an average of 9 children per wife. That's a lot. That's a lot. He married his first wife, Maria S. Haven, in 1845. He married his other 2 wives, Sarah A. Garr and Susan E. McBride, in 1856. Interesting, they didn't mention his 2 second wives, second and third, I guess. In the article, they only mention the first. He is the great-great-grandfather of former presiding bishop of the LDS Church, H. David Burton. Yeah, that name might ring a bell to somebody. Burton died at his home in Salt Lake City on 11 November 1907 and was buried at Salt Lake City Cemetery. So, honestly, the article we read, the historical one, much better than this one. This is the first time that's happened so far in all the ones we've read. The details on this is very, very sketchy. They only included a couple more details that we didn't know before. The person that he accidentally killed, must have been... I'm guessing it was an accident, okay? I'm just throwing it out there. Since he was acquitted, I am going to assume that it was an accident. And that he had so many wives and children. And then, of course, his death, which hadn't happened yet when the article was written. But other than that, the article has more detail. So I'm kind of impressed. The article was then very good in that sense that I can't say for sure if it was accurate, except for the fact that all of the things that it says in this article do line up with what was said in that one. So I'm going to assume that it is an accurate article, and I don't think that that's going too far. Yeah, military guy, and basically a general in the militia. One of the older people, and then he was called to as a first counselor in the Presiding Bishopric, and then a second counselor. No, second counselor and then first counselor. My bad, in that order. And yeah, he served until his death. So it sounds like, oh gosh, I mean, how do you classify his character? He sounds like a very willing volunteer of military service. You know, people who join the military have a very strong sense of who they are and who they want to be represented by and who they want to be represented as, yeah? Also, so I think that says that he had this very strong sense of identity. And yeah, I think it's actually pretty healthy of him to want to be the protector of the area. Yeah, he only really fought if it was necessary. Now, I don't know really anything about the Morrisite War. I'm going to click on it really quickly. Was a skirmish between the Latter-day Saint sect known as the Morrisites and the Utah Territorial Government. Oh, he actually mentioned him by name in this article. I'm not going to read the whole article, it's long. But let's read the little part where they mention him by name. After the Morrisite dishonored a similar writ 3 weeks later, Chief Justice Kinney asked the acting governor to activate the territorial militia as a posse comitatus, I'm sorry, I don't speak Latin, to arrest the Morrisite leader. On June 12, a 200-man armed posse departed Salt Lake City for the fort 30 miles north. Robert T. Burton, Deputy U.S. Marshal, led the posse, which gathered strength along the way and was somewhere between 500 and, what was that say? 100 strong when it reached the settlement on June 13. By then, the Morrisites had barricaded themselves in the fort. What does that say? I don't know what that means, but okay. The posse positioned itself on bluffs southwest of the fort with contingents on the flats to the east and west. They situated cannons on 2 small ridges looking directly at the fort, which in order to accommodate the hundreds of followers was really a makeshift enclosure. A militia from Ogden positioned itself to the north. Burton sent a message via Morrisite herd boy requesting the group surrender within 30 minutes. As soon as he received the message, Morris left his associates and soon returned with a new revelation, promising his people that the posse would be destroyed. Oh gosh. So it sounds like kind of a little culty, yeah? A little cult leader there. He and his counselors had a bugle sounded to gather the congregation and read the revelation. When the group did not respond within 30 minutes, Burton ordered 2 warning shots fired to speed up the decision. The second ball ricocheted off the ground and into the fort, killing 2 women and shattering the jaw of Mary Christopherson. That must have been the woman who was killed, the Isabella, what's her name? Some Morrisites returned the fire, killing the 19-year-old Jared Smith of the posse, the only non-Morrisite casualty of the war. Heavy rains prevented much action the next day, June 14. Historians differ as to what initiated the events of June 15, but at some point, Burton rode into the fort with a small contingent. Details of what followed are also unclear, but Morris may have made a statement to his followers and approached Burton in what was interpreted as a threatening manner. Burton shot and killed him and 2 women, who were also killed in the resulting melee. Morris's counselor, John Banks, was mortally wounded. Burton took 90 men prisoner and marched them back to Salt Lake City the next morning to stand trial before Judge Kinney. Wow. Okay, and aftermath, 7 years later, Robert T. Burton was tried and acquitted for the murder of Isabella Bowman, one of the women killed after the siege. Wow. No, that sounds military related to me. That's why he was acquitted. That must have been really rough. 8 killed on the Morrisites and 1 of the militia, and 147 captured. That's, like, honestly, for considering the size of the group, that's pretty impressive that they managed to capture so many without hurting anyone. Okay, so I just quickly am skimming the information about Joseph Morris, which was why it's called Morrisite, and it looks like he was a member of the church who joined in the 1850s, but around 1860 he was completely convinced that he was receiving revelations and should be the prophet. And Brigham Young was like, yeah, no, you're not. And so he kind of gathered his own following. He was excommunicated in 1861, and shortly thereafter he set up his own church called the Church of the Firstborn. He told his followers that the second coming was coming soon, so don't bother planting any crops. And they waited at the fort for the end of the world, basically. And he kept setting a date for like the second coming, and it kept not happening, and they kept pushing it back, and the people ended up running out of food, and they were getting upset, and it wasn't great. Yeah, apparently someone escaped and said that the Morosites were holding prisoners, and that's when they decided to act, and they sent Robert T. Burton in with his little group of people to stop this. This is enough. Yeah. Yeah, you're not allowed to hold people hostage, and basically we're trying to allow people to leave. Wow. That's crazy. Okay, I did not know this many details. I had heard like something vaguely like that, but I hadn't really read the details of the Morosite War. It looks to me like it was very short-lived. It was only a few days, and that was in June 1862. Wow. Well, I'm a little flabbergasted, but okay. Interesting. Very interesting. So, yeah, Robert T. Burton, military guy who fought a lot of wars and, seemed to know what he was doing. Yeah, when it came to battles and stuff. A little bit of a war hero in the sense, in the general sense, even though it was a militia and not military technically. Like I said, at that time there really wasn't a huge difference except for in the uniform. But, yeah, I would have to admire him for the work that he did in the military, and respect there. I do respect military officers and, enlistees, because what they do is very important in its own right, and that a lot of times we are happy to have the military there, yes. And I am happy that he served in the military and did his part to help establish the territory of Utah as a peaceful place, so that no one else had to fight either. Anyways, I don't know nearly as much about what he did as a presiding bishopric. I don't know exactly. If I find out more details, maybe I will do another video on him at some point. But I do find that really interesting, all the things that he went through. And yeah, if you liked the video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. And I hope to see you in the next video.